Welcome to Encounter, where we celebrate putting faith into action and community leaders who live out compassion, grace, and love. We're a program of the Broome County Council of Churches that addresses food insecurity through CHOW and the Greater Good Grocery, provides hospital and jail ministry, builds wheelchair ramps, and assists neighbors with transportation and shopping services through Faith in Action volunteers. We invite you to the conversation. Encounter your neighbors as we learn to walk together in love and kindness. Good morning. I'm Jeff Kellam, your host this week on Encounter. I serve as allegedly the parish associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott. Let me start with a story. There was this young pastor about 5 years into his pastorate. Well, let's just call him Jeff. And now I've blown it. So this is a story about my early ministry. I was working in radio and TV in Central Virginia for the Presbyterian churches, but I was asked to be the stated supply of a small church, which no longer exists through no fault of my own, actually. So I was making a pastoral call at a hospital, and I wasn't used to that kind of thing because I wasn't a pastor, but again, serving as a temporary supply for the church. On my way to the radio studio, I decided to stop at the hospital. So I went in, and there at the information desk, I asked about the person, and I said, I'm making a pastoral call. And the woman at the desk looked at me kind of askance and said, rather brusquely, do you have a hospital pass? I said, no, for pastoral calls? No, I don't. And she said, do you have clergy credentials? I said, no, not really. And she said, well, let me call the chaplain's office. So I knew the chaplain. He was the adjunct professor of pastoral care at the seminary that I attended. And so I thought, well, Bill will let me go up on the floor. Everything will be fine. So Bill comes down to the desk, takes one look at me and says, so you're making a pastoral call dressed like that? And I thought, well, I wasn't in a Celebration Rock t-shirt or anything, but I had jeans on and probably a button-down shirt. And he said, when you come into the hospital to make a pastoral call, coat and tie, next time, okay? He was more stern than any of my seminary professors had been when I almost flunked Old Testament theology. So, the rules have changed. He let me up, by the way, and I visited the woman and everything was fine. And from then on, I wore a coat and tie to the hospital. Rules have changed, dress has changed. We're so much more informal these days. I think I'm one of 3 people in the church that wears a tie still. So there are some rules, though, that haven't changed about visiting in the hospital. And today's program isn't about clergy visiting, it's about you visiting your next door neighbor, your spouse, a child, anybody, making a pastoral call because you want to support them in their illness, whatever it may be. So our guest today is very familiar to Encounter viewers. It's Rachel Helgeson, who was a one-time co-host until we fired her and and sent her to the hospital. She works with the Broome County Council of Churches as the Director of Hospital Ministry at UHS. And Rachel, pardon my kidding around, she, as a chaplain, now you've been on before talking about chaplaincy, which is the professional helper in the hospital situation or in college campuses and so on. But this time we want to talk about when lay people go to the hospital to visit, what are some do's and don'ts?
Yeah.
Start with maybe that question,
Yeah, so one of the things I hear particularly from some folks who have seen shifts in how hospitals are run is they're unfamiliar with HIPAA. and that's fair, but HIPAA is there to protect the patient and it's there to help them. So whatever the patient is asking for, that's what we're going to honor. So, but also I'm even hearing you talk about asking the chaplain. I hear a little bit of that story in your story about HIPAA is to say, like, who is this person who's coming to visit us? Do we know them?
Yeah.
So the best thing to do in these situations is to make sure that you have already contacted your friend or a loved one. Of course, if it's a loved one, there's usually things that you filled out so you can be there, so that's not the same. But if you're like their bestie or somebody from church or their next door neighbor, the best thing to do is make sure that you've contacted them first to say, is it okay if I come and visit you? There's a whole slew of reasons why people may be like, not yet.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, like maybe they've just had surgery and they're just like, I just don't have any energy, or I just don't want you to see me this way, but I'm gonna need you a little later, so can you hold off? So that's always my first thing for you, is just to find out if it really is. And it's okay if you don't get a hold of the patient. The other option is to get a hold of their loved one, right? To say, hey, would it be okay if I came by? And they'll let you know, like, because they've already been talking. So just check that out even before you decide you're going to come. Don't do like a one time just coming up to visit. I mean, some unless you have that sort of relationship, I wouldn't do that. And it doesn't mean you're not caring, because you can send stuff. You could send flowers. You can send cards. Those are all great things to do too.
Sure.
Yeah.
And this is the same for family members. It would be for your next door neighbor to call ahead so that you know that your visit is appropriate, and you also know maybe the best time to go.
Right. So lunchtime is not the best time to go, and nap time isn't the best time to go. Usually, like, there's a mid-morning round. So if you're going to get there early, that's fine. But like 8 o'clock, and then there's going to be rounding from the hospital staff. So you might want to, unless they want somebody to be there to like be a separate ear, may not be the best time to be there. And then there's like a later in the afternoon, after lunch and nap time, because after you eat you get tired, and then so later in the afternoon to eat evening is great. They're gonna usually on most of the units they will say to ask you to leave after 8 o'clock unless it's an emergency and you are part of the family, which is a different role. So those are things to consider. If you're a friend, neighbor, those are the time frames to try to come in. And just to honor that they need rest and they need to recoup and get the food they need.
And I think we all have our different personality traits. Some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts. Some folks thrive on having a room full of people, and others really just want the privacy to heal and to have the quiet and the rest. Are there rules on how many people can visit at once? If you take 2 or 3 people with you from the family, for example?
It depends on what unit you're on. So for instance, if you're in ICU, then yes, there are rules about how many people can come in, and it depends on what you have. So ask the nurse if you're wondering. That's a good question. You could ask the unit nurse and say how many people can be in. They'll let you know. They'll be honest with you. They're really efficient and good. As far as like other units, like if they're on behavioral health, there are different times frames, and again, that's very private. So you have to know that they're there and they have to approve you. And so there's a whole list of things. So it's a little different depending on what unit you're going to. If it's regular med surge, more people can be in there depending on what's happening. So again, best advice is just to go up to the unit nurse or call the unit nurse and say, can I come on up?
And you mentioned HIPAA. What are the appropriate questions you can ask a patient? I mean, I can imagine somebody going into the room and saying, well, what's going on? What was your surgery, and asking some personal questions that perhaps are very inappropriate.
I would veer away from that unless the person brings it up. It's always the answer, right? You can always say, like, I know you're in the hospital and this probably is a lot. If you want to talk about that, and if they bring up like, I just had surgery and XYZ happened, then you are more than welcome to talk about it. Like that's an invitation.
They've opened the door.
They've opened the door, but don't lead with that. Don't lead with it. Like, let them be able to talk about it, because they're going to bring up whatever it is. And I find quite often people are pretty honest unless they're super introverted and just need space. And so just try to honor that, because they're already not feeling good.
Or they wouldn't be there.
And some people I've actually had some people be like, I don't want to talk about my surgery right now. I want to talk about what's going out in the world right now. Can you tell me what's happening out there? Like, how's the weather? Weather is, you sound silly, but it is really very helpful. Like, because if you're in the hospital, you don't know. It may look sunny, but it may be like a couple weeks ago, negative, whatever, you know. And so, or another day it could be looking cloudy, but it's actually temperate outside. So it just depends on what. The weather is actually a really good place to start.
Especially for the person if it's a 2-bed room, and you're the person behind the curtain and not at the window, you have no idea what's going on up there.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you visit, I visited someone just a couple of weeks ago, and there was no place to sit. And I know you don't sit on the bed, ever.
Yeah.
Or do you, if you have an intimate relationship with that person in the bed, a child, for example?
Right, so if your family, like if you're the spouse, your child, your intimate partner, that's one thing, right? But if you're a visitor and you're their church bestie or the neighbor, don't sit on their bed, because they're wired up to all sorts of things, and it's checking and monitoring them. So you could actually set off some alarms that you don't want to set off. An exception to that is if they're like in occupational therapy and they're sitting in the chair, and that's the other space, and they say yes, it's okay for you to sit in the bed, then that's okay. But make sure first, again, your nurse is your best friend. Like, just go and be like, hey, is it okay if I sit on the bed? I see they're sitting on the, and that's okay.
Right.
Nurses want to help and try to help you.
I wound up leaning against the air conditioner near the window, and I shifted
perfect.
once, and the patient said, just clear off there was a chair there, but it was filled with the tissue box, this thing and that thing, and she said, just move those out of the way. I didn't want to touch things I wasn't allowed to touch.
Yeah, and if they give you permission, then that's okay too. And you could even ask, if you see a chair in the room, is it okay if I move these things? I see that you have them there for accessibility, and they'll let you know. People are pretty honest about that.
Right,
so,
right.
Yep.
Have you had any, I don't need to call them horror stories, but have you had to deal with these things as a chaplain when something inappropriate is from a visitor?
Yeah. Sometimes people think that they can come to visit, and they work their way through. One example was somebody pretending to be somebody else, and they got up to the floor, and so we had to say, hey, no. So please don't pretend to be somebody else. Don't pretend to be their pastor if you're not their pastor. Please don't pretend to be a chaplain if you're not a chaplain, and please don't pretend to be a family member. It's already complicated, so don't do that.
Right.
Yeah, and sometimes people will try to call and ask when somebody's decided that they want to be quiet. If they say they're not there, please don't try to press that. There might be a reason that they may be there, but they might be on a list to be quiet right now. So just try to honor that. I get it. We want to know everything. We live in an information technology world, and we want to know everything about everybody, but sometimes people need privacy and they just need space. So just honor that, and when the time comes, it will come up, and they'll let you know when they're ready for it.
I remember another hospital call where I went in to the ward and did not stop at the nurse's desk. I was given the room number and saw that the door was open. Walked in, and the patient was there, and she said, well, I guess you didn't see the sign on the door. Well, the door was open, and I looked at her first, and over on the door it says, no visitors, please. And so I backed away. I said, I'm terribly sorry. She said, well, now that you're here, you may as well come in. And, I was her pastor. I did not know her well, but I thought, okay, and it just put a pall on the whole visit.
Yeah.
So I think checking at the desk when you go in, if there is a desk and they're available to talk to you, they're busy folks too.
Yep. And if you did get up, let's say you are the pastor, you know their name, you know that they're there. Check the desk. If the desk isn't unavailable, the next thing to do is just check on the door. So even if the door's open, a lot of hospitals now have kept either there's an electronic thing to say what they're doing, or a little paper. So just see if it's there. And it's also a good habit anyways, because if somebody's in isolation, you need to find out if you need to wear a mask and gown. So again, if you're feeling uncomfortable about that, go back up to the desk afterwards if you see that and say, hey, I see this and I don't know what to do, or can you clue me in on that?
Our guest today is the Reverend Rachel Helgeson, who is the Director of Hospital Ministry at the UHS Hospitals, working with the Broome County Council of Churches. So I'm so glad you're there to offer us this guidance. a very practical thing, you know, I've gone to visit and the room is empty. The person's up for tests, and so do I wait in the hall? Do I wait in the room? Where do I wait if the person's not there, or if they're in the bathroom?
Yeah, so again, it depends. That's where I see gut check. When I talk to my chaplains about it, we can go back, right? You may not be in that situation to be able to go back. If you're on a timetable, the best thing to do is leave like a little card and say,
A note.
"Hi, I was here. Sorry, I missed you." And you can leave your contact information, and if they want to, they'll call you.
Yeah.
But I quite often hear from patients how much that meant to them. They're like, "Did you know so and so came and visited me, and I wasn't able to be here, but I'm just so glad that they took the time." You know, so that's an easy way to do that. Another option, you can stay in the room if you've been given permission to sit in the room. Again, just check and ask the desk and say, like, how long will they be? They asked me to come and visit.
Yeah.
That's an easy thing. And if they're like, it's going to be a couple hours, you may not want to stay there for that, right?
Sure.
But no, they're just out for about 20 minutes. Sure, you can sit down in one of the chairs and wait for them. And they'll let you know when they're coming back in. Can you step out for a moment and come back in? The other option is you could go downstairs to like one of the eating areas and just hang out there and come back up in about 20 to 30 minutes if
Sure.
you're feeling uncomfortable about staying in the room. The times to be out in the hallway are if the nurses ask you to do that, but the patients are coming in and out, people are coming in and out. It's not always the best thing to be out in the hallway unless it's an emergency. But again, like if you're feeling uncomfortable, just ask the nurses station and they'll help you.
Yeah, I had that happen to me with someone in the emergency room, and I was kind of hanging around. And they said it'd be best if you went into the waiting room and waited there rather than in the hall. So, obviously. Sometimes we find ourselves in a position of visiting someone and not knowing what to talk about or what to say or whether to pray with them. Do you pray with every person you visit?
No, because I ask them, and I would say you can ask them. A lot of people say yes. Mm-hmm. Most people say yes, but there's some people who just, for whatever reason, say no. But again, it's all about autonomy, right? So saying, "Hi, you've had this great visit with them," and you're like, I'm just feeling like I'd love to pray with you, but do you feel comfortable with that? And most people will say yes. And what I usually say next is like, what would you like me to pray for?
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, a cue.
Give them a cue, because a lot of autonomy has been taken away by being in the hospital. I mean, because you're not able to do all the things you can, right? And this gives them space to be like, what's on my heart right now, and to be able to pray for that. So that's usually what I pray for. If they say no, then I honor that, and it's like, and I'll say like, I just want to let you know that since I'm, from the spiritual care department, I'll say, the spiritual care department is lifting you up, and that we're here for you. And if you need connections with people outside that you need us to contact, we will do that for you and advocate for you. So people also appreciate that. So it's interesting. Most people do say yes, though, but it's interesting that if you give people autonomy to be able to make that decision for themselves,
sure,
it helps them feel more comfortable in that moment.
This is now we've been talking about your role as chaplain with people, and when a lay person comes from the church, sometimes they don't know if the patient says, "Would you say a prayer for me?" The person is stunned and they're maybe not used to leading in a prayer, and so silent prayer or even just a prayer that says, "Thank you, Lord, for being with us, and please guide all those who are helping this person."
Absolutely.
The simpler the prayer, you don't need a long 20-minute pastoral prayer and cover the whole world. It's looking at that one patient and their needs.
Yeah, and it's
Comfort.
also okay, like if you come from a tradition where there's already written prayers, if that's your comfort level, it's okay to use those. I have Catholic, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist folks who just are like, I just am not comfortable coming up with my own prayer, but they have prayer books. And so they will use a prayer that they've talked about or whatever that feels comfortable and use those words. So it's okay to do that. There's lots of different ways to get at prayer. I've done breath prayers with people and breathing exercises for some people who are not necessarily religious, but still feel connected to the divine in whatever way that they define that. And a breath exercise sometimes helps calm them down. So again, like, you may be coming at it as a prayer, they may be coming at it as a meditation, but that's where we meet each other in the middle.
Yeah. When you encounter a person who is having some difficulty, the patient is having some sort of difficulty, and it may be a physical thing. Perhaps it's I don't know. They don't feel like they're being cared for right, or that they're not getting the attention they want. When can the layperson who's visiting become an advocate, and to whom do they advocate if they feel that the patient needs something?
Right.
I mean, I was about to list, should they do this? I don't need to give you a multiple choice.
So the best thing to do is ask them, like, can you tell me a little bit more about that? If they've told you, yeah, this happened, X, Y, Z, there's a couple of options. One is, if you don't feel comfortable doing this by yourself, you can contact the spiritual care office and we will advocate for them. So that's one way to do that if you're like, I just don't even know how to navigate the system. And I actually brought phone numbers if you're wondering about that. The spiritual care office has 2 offices. One's at Wilson, 607-763-6003, and BGH 607-762-2446. Or you can just call the hospital and say, I need the spiritual care department, and they will connect you to us. So that's one way to do that. Another way is just to go over to the nurse. Do I know who your nurse is? Look on the board in their room and see who their nurse is.
Yeah.
And then you can go to the desk and say, hi, patient XYZ, I need to talk to nurse ABC. And if the nurse is rounding, they'll let you know at the desk. They're like, oh, their nurse is over there, and we'll go get her for you, or him. And so, like, they'll get the nurse, bring them over, and make sure that they're able to talk to you, and they'll take it from there. They're like, thank you so much for letting us know about this. If you feel that wasn't enough, there's always a patient care department, and you can contact the patient care department, and they will follow up with it.
Yeah.
So there's a couple different ways you can advocate for them.
So the spiritual care office or the patient care, that would be one way to do it. After you've perhaps checked in at the nurse's station. Once again, the nurse is the person most, pardon the expression, hands-on in that hospital situation.
Yep. So
when I know that I have visited as a pastor to a member of my congregation, and I remember in another hospital in another city, another person came by to offer pastoral guidance from another church, and it was a lay person, and they apparently were just going from room to room to room. Is that appropriate?
So no. If they're a volunteer, which we have volunteers who do round, they go room to room to room. That's one thing, but they've been trained. They go through a volunteer program through the Council of Churches and at UHS, and so they're asked to go room to room to room. And usually, my volunteers know that they have to, if they see somebody else there, that they'll say, "Hi, I'm from spiritual care. We're here for you. I see that you already have a visitor here. If you need us, I'll come back, or I'll come back later." So, but if you're a clergy person, no, you can't do that. You can go and visit your people. Like, that's 100. We want you to do that. We want you to provide spiritual care, and actually, there's laws around allowing you to do that. But on the same side, because of HIPAA, you can't just go to neighbor XYZ unless they're in the same room and that neighbor says, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you." But you can't go from room to room to room to room. You can't do that. That actually has been an educational thing that we've had to do in the community, and we really want you to come and see your people. We want you to them to feel supportive, but again, we also want to honor the other patients and their rights too. So it's a both and.
I have a couple of kids who want to come on the set in about 2 minutes. Okay, I have 2 more minutes. Tell me about the. Now I've lost my train of thought. So I'm still trying to. Oh, I know. You did a workshop for people who wanted to volunteer, and I know you've talked about that on Encounter before.
Yes.
But in case folks have missed that, you have 1 minute before 2 children come running onto the set.
Yeah, so if you are interested in joining us and being a volunteer, and you feel that spiritual care is your gift, no matter what your faith tradition is, denominationally, spirituality, we would love to talk to you. And you can contact, again, those phone numbers that I gave earlier, or contact the hospital, or you can email me, our Helgeson at nyuhs.org, or you can just look at the Broome County Council of Churches website and they'll be able to contact you. But we would love to talk to you, and we'll train you, and we try to get folks in for at least an hour a week. But we will be doing some more training sometime in the spring, and we'll let folks know when that's coming up. And there'll be, you can always keep checking with the Council of Churches to see when that is. So we would love for you to join us. And it is very meaningful. All of my volunteer chaplains have different stories of why they're doing it. It's usually very personal, but they love giving back to the community in that way. So we would love for you to do that too.
So once again, the Broome County Council of Churches website will give you the portal to get to the pastoral care section and to contact Rachel for more information. If you feel that this is kind of your call as a layperson to visit someone or visit at the 2 UHS hospitals.
Yeah.
Okay, now, would you like to introduce your children? Come on over, stand between us, okay?
This is my daughter Sophie. She's 10 years old, and this is my son Isaac. He's 7 years old.
This is our 2 minutes of fame. I got a suit on.
So they're really excited to meet you all and to be able to say that care comes in all shapes and sizes and all ages and times, and they're just excited to know like what Pastor Jeff is doing and how he's led Encounter, but also to see like what their mom does outside of seeing them being their mom. So we're grateful for the community at large to be able to welcome my kids, and to also to know that there are opportunities for them too as they grow older to be able to see where the divine is calling them to.
Can you please get out of the chairs? This is our 2 minutes.
What was that? You know, and Isaac is dressed far more appropriately for a hospital visit than I was when I started my ministry. If you didn't hear that story at the beginning of the program, where were you? I'm Jeff Kellam. Thank you for being with us for the Encounter program, which is produced in cooperation with the Broome County Council of Churches, and that supports Rachel's ministry and the hospital chaplaincy, and also, of course, sponsors the Encounter program. Our thanks to WBNG TV for the lights, the cameras, the action, and for all the Town Square media stations that carry the audio portion of our program. I'm sorry you couldn't see the 2 kids, but use your imaginations. They're beautiful. And I'm Jeff Kellam, the parish associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott, stretching to finish the program. We'll see you again next week on Encounter.
Thank you, Jeff.